Um, Thank you, poets and writers, for this honor. I am deeply touched by it. And Poets and Writers, I think, was the first sort of introduction for me to the New York literary world. When my first collection of short stories came out, I received an invitation in the mail from Poets and Writers to this event. And it was the first time I had come to a big New York event. I was so thrilled and so dazzled by this literary crowd. I knew no one. It was at the University Club in those days. And there was this huge room of 400 strangers. So I didn't know anyone and didn't know who to speak to, but it was the most glamorous evening, perhaps, of my literary life, that moment. So thank you, Poets and Writers, for introducing me to this world. I don't know when I first started writing, but I know the first time that I ever tried to write for the public. It was in second grade, and I started a newspaper called the Daily Nut. And it was on that yellow newsprint with very faint green lines. And at the top, I wrote the Daily Nut, and then I drew pictures of acorns in case nobody understood that. The first day of its one-day run, it started to snow, and I saw the news possibilities of this, and I ran to the window for some firsthand observation, ran back to my desk and wrote, "It's snowing." That short, taut, concise sentence seemed to have everything I needed. But I could see the story wasn't over, so I ran back to the window and got more information and came back and wrote, "It's snowing harder now." And I wrote the letters slanted to indicate urgency. But even for me, the story was beginning to fall flat. And I could see that I was going to need more here, and I didn't like being dependent on the outside world for the story and the urgency. And it was in that moment that I gave up journalism forever and became a fiction writer. I wanted to tell my own truth, and I would tell it in my own slant. So that was my moment. The way I came to work for writers, to help writers the way I was helped in the world, was partly from my own background. I grew up as a Quaker, so being an activist was very natural to me. And when I came to New York, it was natural to me to join activist organizations, the Authors Guild, Pan American Center, and Poets and Writers, all of which support writers in tremendously important ways. It's surprising, isn't it, that in the 21st century, writers need support? Isn't the writer an essential part of democracy? Didn't the founders believe this and write protection of their work into the Constitution? And yet writers do need support today. They're under siege. Overseas, the threat is physical. At home, it's economic. Writers' incomes are plummeting. At the Authors Guild, we did a survey that showed that incomes of writers had dropped 40% in the last 10 years. That's not an economic model that can survive. I had the honor of serving as the president of the Authors Guild during our lawsuit against Google. The company had taken copyrighted material without asking permission or offering compensation and used it for commercial purposes. For 10 years, the Authors Guild fought through the courts to protect writers from this action. And we stood up to Amazon when they removed the buy button from Macmillan Books, causing devastating harm to their writers. The literary marketplace was once a sustainable ecosystem made up of writers, agents, bookstores, distributors, and publishers. We were all partners. The market compensated us all, and we depended on each other. Now the marketplace itself has become our competitor. Electronic platforms rely on us for content, but instead of treating us as their partner, sometimes they treat us as prey. Piracy, too, is thriving on electronic platforms. Everyone, it seems, reads pirated books. We've become so accustomed to free content that our moral compass point now points to don't ask. We may think it's the big companies that are taking advantage of us, but often it's just everyone we know. This shift is enormous and devastating to writers. This is the climate change of the writer's world. And the Authors Guild has been taking on this challenge. We believe that writers should be compensated for their work, as should publishers and agents. Is that so crazy? We don't think so. I'm proud to have played a part in this epic struggle, but I'm also proud to have played a part in smaller ones, minor personal ones. A number of years ago, this is a story that I've never been able to tell before, but I think this is the right moment. A writer came to me, a woman I'll call Mary. She was mentoring young women writers in Afghanistan. One day, she emailed me about one of them, whom I'll call Lila. Lila was a student at the university where her father had encouraged her to get a degree. But when she graduated, she was expected to marry a much older man to whom she'd been promised. During university, Lila had fallen in love with another student, and she'd married him without her family's knowledge. Her father had now died, and her mother wanted her to leave college. Lila had written poems about this. They had not been printed under her name, and they had appeared only in an online magazine. But the Taliban had seen them, and they began to threaten her. Mary knew Afghanistan, and she asked if I could help. I called an international relief agency who put us both in touch with a European refugee group. Between us, we put together a team of experts. Time began to be precious. The Taliban was pressuring Lila's family. As we were talking to these agencies, we were tracking Lila. For a week, we waited by our phones. She had left Kabul and gone into hiding. She called Mary in the middle of the night from a friend's bathroom where no one could hear her speaking English. Then she vanished. The agency wanted more information. Was Lila a well-known writer? Did she have a passport? Did she want permanent refugee status? Was she coming alone? Now Lila's mother had learned about the marriage. She told Lila to repent and to turn herself over to the Taliban. Mary had found an American man in Kabul who said he would help. We had to believe him. Now Lila had left Kabul for the countryside, and we couldn't reach her. Mary in Brooklyn began to get messages from Afghani sites. "We know where you live," they said. "You are near paradise. You will see it soon." During the night, I went on Google Earth to look up the European company's embassy in Kabul. I wondered if the Taliban could see me searching. Lila surfaced in Kabul, but her passport and that of her husband, who decided to join her, was inside her apartment, which was watched by the Taliban. Mary kept getting messages about paradise. Her mother wrote to Lila to turn herself in. "Do not endanger your family," she said. Mary threw away her cell phone. She sent me a new number through a friend. On Wednesday, the American man wrote to say they were in a safe house. He would get the passports and he would drive them to the embassy on Friday. But now he was going dark. We would have no way of reaching any of them until Friday. We waited. Late on Thursday night, I scanned the silent streets of Kabul, imagining the American's car driving towards the embassy. And on Friday morning, we heard they'd arrived. They were safe in the embassy, and they'd fly out on Monday. They had the weekend together to adjust to the fact that they were leaving Afghanistan together. On Saturday morning, Lila's husband changed his mind. By Sunday night, he had changed it back. On Monday morning, they walked out the door together, and the ambassador himself took them to the airport. A chartered plane was waiting, and an aide flew with them to the European capital. When they arrived there, a group of women were waiting for them, holding flowers. A year later, I talked to someone on our team that week. He'd been to Europe since then, and he'd seen Lila. "So how is she?" I asked. "What's she doing?" "They're both learning the language," he said, "and she's pregnant." Helping writers is not always that exciting, but it's always that worthwhile. We need them in the world. Thank you, poets and writers, for your support of all of us.